Thanks for inviting me to present at the first International Planning Conference for New Regenerative Cities. It's a great honour. My name is Jo Williams. I'm a Professor in Sustainable Urban Systems at University College London. I am also the Director of the Circular Cities Hub, and I am a visiting Professor at the Technical University of Delft in the Netherlands. Much of my work has focused on Europe. However, I have also conducted research in China, and more recently, I'm working with other researchers in Indonesia. Thus, today, although I speak about European best practice, I will also try to draw across from my work in Indonesia to make it more relevant to this audience. Circular urban systems are systems in which resources are reused, recycled, or energy recovered. Resources that are considered with circular urban systems include materials, of course, water, nutrients, land, infrastructure of all sorts, grey, green, and blue, and of course, energy. Circular urban systems aim to restore both natural cycles, water cycles, nutrient cycles, carbon cycles, and so on, and also create technical cycles for materials, infrastructure, and energy. Circular urban system is one which is territorialized across many scales, but it's embedded in a physical context so that we can see where the, if you like, circular activities and the flows of resources are moving from and to and what they're being used for. In my research across the European cities, I've found that there are a huge number of benefits for adopting this approach. The obvious one is reducing resource consumption and waste, but also emissions that are generated from a variety of activities relating to resource consumption. However, they also generate considerable social and economic benefits, as we can see in this diagram here. And if you want to read more about that, you can read it in my book, Circular Cities, A Revolution in Urban Sustainability. Circular urban systems might help some of the issues that arise in Southeast Asian cities. For example, organic waste is a crucial issue in most sea cities, contributing the largest waste composition, mostly transported to landfills, generating methane and potentially causing landfill explosions and garbage landslides. Closing organic resource loops through reuse, recycling, and recovering energy would be beneficial, certainly in this context. Second, basic water sanitation and hygiene infrastructure is still inadequate in many sea cities. Grey and black water continue to contaminate rivers and sometimes groundwater, while households and businesses rely very heavily on groundwater. Urban water companies also rely on often polluted river water as their potable source, which requires much more effort to purify it. So circular water systems might help to overcome some of these problems. Third, most sea cities lack public space, especially green spaces, and they also lack affordable housing. If we use circular tactical urbanism, this could help address the problem. Also, of course, by creating a more circular economy related to all these different activities, we could help to tackle the issues associated with poverty through job creation, income generation, and of course, improving access to basic resources like energy, water, accommodation, green space, and so on. Europe has produced some pioneering waste to energy closed loop systems. This here in the figure in front of you is one of them. It's the Hammarby system or the closed loop system or the eco-cycle system first pioneered in Stockholm in Sweden. However, it is also a system which is operated across many of the Nordic countries. The system utilises a citywide district heating system, combined heat and power plant and a thermal power station, basically to use waste resources to generate lots of different forms of energy. For example, the heat produced from the process of the purifying of wastewater is used by the thermal power station. And then together with technologies for converting sludge into fertilizers and biogas, that power station also further generates energy. The biogas element has been very successful, and it's now used to power much of the public transport in Stockholm. Also, the gas produced from this process can be used by biogas cookers in this neighbourhood in the Hammarby area. This system has actually managed to reduce energy use between 30 to 40%, same for CO2 emissions, water consumption between 40 to 46%, and the waste going to landfill by 90%. So it has obvious advantages in terms of reducing resource consumption, emissions, and waste. Waste to energy systems, although perhaps not as sophisticated as the one that I've just demonstrated, are also happening in sea cities. But incinerators and RDF are seen as the most promising measures within these cities. As yet, biogas has not really been seen as promising, despite the fact that Southeast Asian cities produce significant amounts of organic waste. However, there is a lack of waste separation and collection services in many of these cities, which makes systems like Hammarby's much more difficult to introduce. Perhaps in this instance, more decentralised off-grid, lower tech and cost-effective solutions might be helpful, like the household biodigester pictured here, which uses organic waste and can, of course, also use sewage. Black soldier-fired composting is already very popular in Southeast Asian cities. This again is a low-tech and low-cost solution to dealing with organic waste. It can deal with things like sewage, agricultural waste, food waste, and so on. This then is used to produce biogas, fertilizers, and also a high-protein food stock for animals. Space needs to be allocated for this activity, preferably in close proximity to where it's used, or low emission solutions will be required to actually move the products to the users. Given the scale of organic waste production in Southeast Asian cities, more could be made of this resource. Indonesia consumed around 8 million tonnes of cooking oil in 2022. Around 700,000 to 900,000 tonnes are practically and economic collectible. However, only about 227,000 tonnes is currently collected. Yet, this cooking oil could be used as a vital resource, not only to sort of supply the global thirst for renewable diesel, but also for sustainable aviation fuel. Both are important for a sustainable future. We go back here to Europe, and this is Amsterdam. Amsterdam is embracing the circular bioeconomy. This is the biocluster in Amsterdam. Amsterdam is interested in creating a circular bioeconomy because of various needs for the Netherlands. The Netherlands wants to become less reliant on imports for food and energy, to tackle waste, and also to reduce emissions, and also to become a leader in a new growing economic sector. Amsterdam recycles currently phosphate from sewage to use as a fertiliser. It does this at scale and produces enough fertiliser to fertilise 10,000 football pitches annually. Other resources are also being harvested from wastewater. Alginic acid from granular sludge is being used in the pharmaceutical and food industries. Biogas for cooking, electricity and heat is being generated alongside advanced chemicals. And the cellulose fibres found in toilet paper in sewage is being used to produce building materials, paper products and bioplastics. In addition, Amsterdam is sort of involved in a project called the Power to Protein project, which is working to extract ammonia from sewage to create high value proteins, which should be sufficient to provide all of the residents of Amsterdam with 35% of their primary protein requirement. Now, Amsterdam's existing infrastructure, location on global trading routes, and expertise in bioindustries all help to support this. But so too does the city's circular economy strategy and its national policy framework, which support the growth of a circular economy. So there's a desire for the city and its businesses to become innovators in this field, and all of these things help. But the designation of space for the biocluster in Nepal and the support that it's been given in terms of developing the existing infrastructure, which then lead into the city to supply the city and also the airport with the biodiesel and biogas, is also essential. Circularity in the water sector is less explicitly discussed in the Southeast Asian context. The concept of water-sensitive cities is much more widely used. In fact, both concepts share common ideas and tools. However, the water-sensitive concept is commonly suggestive for disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation, such as flood mitigation and groundwater recharge, although the implementation is still very limited. The situation actually necessitates water circularity in cities, both technical through rainwater harvesting, water reclamation plants and so on, and biological and ecological through groundwater recharge and river restoration. Paris has an excellent water infrastructure with minimal losses. It also has a metered water system. Both of these things mean that water is conserved. Potable water is conserved in Paris. It has alongside this a grey water system which has actually existed for the past 200 years. Grey water is very inexpensive and it's used in large quantities in the city. Most of the grey water is, in fact, 98% is consumed by the city of Paris and used for hydrants, fountains, street cleaning, watering of public gardens, flushing of sewers, etc. But it is reused. So it's a grey water reuse system which is operating at city scale. However, Paris is now investigating replacing this system with blue and green infrastructure. Thus, they're promoting the use of more localized blue and green grey water reuse systems. And we're starting to see new developments emerge, which have things like rainwater gardens, permeable surfaces, swales, reed beds, retention ponds, and so on, creating these sustainable urban drainage systems across the city and facilitating grey water reuse. A lack of public space and green space and affordable accommodation is also an issue in Southeast Asian cities. Tactical circular urbanism, which reuses spaces in cities for new, often temporary uses, is very popular actually in European cities and could offer a solution in the case of the Southeast Asian context. In Paris, two key initiatives have emerged, the Paris Reinvented and the Paris Culture initiatives, both of which have promoted the reuse of space and buildings and rooftops for new uses, including things like urban farming, but also for the provision of things like affordable accommodation. Here we can see the reuse of a rooftop for the Paris Expo Porte de Versailles rooftop farm. These projects have been supported through the spatial plan, online platforms identifying where these spaces are available, by consultants as well, consultancies providing this information, and also grants and crowdfunding. In London, the spatial plan also supports the temporary use of space for these lower value activities, so it's very much formalised. Some similar ideas are beginning to emerge in Southeast Asian cities, like in Jakarta, where leftover spaces under the elevated highways, for example, are being used for urban gardening. Reusing vacant buildings or land for affordable housing is also starting to be proposed in this context, but it still remains a fairly niche idea. In London, the adaptive reuse of existing infrastructure provides one option for affordable housing. Here is an example of adaptively reusing garages for social housing in East London. Here's another example from London where reusable movable infrastructure is being used to accommodate those on housing waiting lists. These are pods which are made from recycled materials. They're also reusable. You can restack them in lots of different ways, and they can easily be assembled and disassembled and moved to new sites, which means that sites can be temporarily used to accommodate people, and then things can be reassembled, disassembled and reassembled on new sites and used elsewhere. So it's particularly useful because it enables sites to be used temporarily between developments for this purpose. My research has identified numerous policy levers which have been used to implement circular urban systems in Europe. This figure provides you with an indication of some of those policy levers. I urge you to read my book where I provide a lot more information about the different types of levers and how they're used. What you'll find from this is that planning is a very important lever. In a more recent paper, I've also written extensively about how planning can be used to actually deliver these more circular urban systems. I investigated how spatial, collaborative and regulatory planning could all be used to support the implementation of circular urban systems. And in sum, what it showed was that planning can play a valuable role in delivery using the spatial plan, both strategies and visions, planning conditions and land release, temporary planning permissions, and the collaborative planning process to enable these changes to happen. So, for example, planning can intervene in land markets and provide space for circular activities through using land release and temporary permissions. It can offer certainty for investors, providing supportive infrastructure and services for new circular systems through strategic plans and visions. It can also provide certainty for those producing reusable, adaptable buildings or using recyclable materials. It can enable the exchange of knowledge and building of capacity and support for new circular systems through collaborative planning. Thus, planning does have a key role in this process. You can read much more about everything I've talked about today in my work. Here's a list of publications, and I've highlighted in yellow the two publications that I've particularly mentioned during this presentation, one of which you can see on the right is my book, Circular Cities, A Revolution in Urban Sustainability. However, there'll be much more coming in the not too distant future, I hope, which will be much more relevant to the Southeast Asian cities when we start publishing material on Indonesia. You can also find out more about the work of the researchers who are working on circularity at UCL by accessing this site, which is the Circularity Hub at www.ucl.ac.uk. So I hope that's been interesting. I hope it's brought up lots of questions. If you would like to contact me to discuss more, anything that I've presented today, you want to hear more about the research that we're actually doing at UCL within this area, or you might want to collaborate in the future, I'd be extremely keen to hear from you. Thank you for the opportunity and have a good day.